My name is Lisa Pedicone, and I am a PhD who has spent my career in the pharmaceutical industry, the last 12 years in the liver disease space. And so I've worked on clinical trials and medical affairs, education on all types of liver diseases. And in addition to being in the pharmaceutical medical industry, I'm also the mother of a patient with a 16-year-old son with both Crohn's and PSC. I co-chaired one of the sessions on what to look for in clinical trials. So the focus of the talk was essentially describing what are clinical trials and the different phases of clinical trials and what a patient who is interested in clinical trials should look for and how to interpret results that may come out. There's a lot of lay press that you see, data out there, and really how much seriousness you should give to these. If they're very early stages, how credible is the data versus something that is a more late stage where the data is a bit more solid. Unfortunately, there are very few clinical trials for PSC, so the group, we talked about what is currently out there and the hope of having new drugs and in development coming out and how they can potentially look at whether or not they would qualify for those studies. A lot of it is focused on looking at inclusion and exclusion criteria for studies and really describing why studies are limited to certain patients and that it's very difficult to get into a clinical trial if you don't meet those criteria, even though you may be one of the sickest of the sick patient and need this drug. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get exclusions in these studies. Essentially, they're looking for more of a homogeneous population so that they can answer the specific question. And in addition, there's always a benefit risk to all these clinical trials. So you want to, because you're also looking at the safety profile for these new products, you want to make sure that you're not really testing it in the patients that are incredibly sick and have a lot of other negative things happening at the same time. Right, and essentially they would then demand typically that they're studied in the more severe patients. So once you show that the drug essentially is safe and that it does have efficacy, so it does work to some extent in this population, then they do start expanding to other populations. And so it may be the later trials that the most severe patients can get enrolled into to see the safety and the efficacy in those patients. So the discussion was, I think all research is great research. So a lot of the things that are currently out there for PSC patients, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, which is the website that has all the trials that are out there, most of them are not new drugs that are in testing. There are some that are looking at, their surveys, so very important information that's needed out there. There's others that are taking blood samples because they're doing genetic studies to try to characterize PSC patients and look for new targets. So those are can be considered, a phase 1 or really just a research protocol. So those I think are incredibly important. Because PSC patients are so rare. So if you do have the opportunity to give a sample that they can test, they're blinded samples so nobody will know your name or anything about you, but they're in the matter of research, they can go an incredibly long way in hopefully finding a target for an ultimate cure for this disease. Yes, personally I have found the conference incredibly helpful. I have access to many hepatologists that I work with professionally, so any medical question that I have, I can get answered in an instant, and I'm able to really, follow up on the best care for my son. However, the thing that the conference offered me was a network of 200 people that either have PSC or a caregiver or a spouse. And that is the most incredible thing in sharing stories with other families and comparing and contrasting what you're going through and what they're going through. Because speaking to a doctor, they may give you little snippets of patients of theirs, but they don't see it in the same light that a parent or a spouse or a patient does. And that's been the most impactful thing for me here. I think the one takeaway, the personal thing that I have seen that has made me feel a bit more comfortable is the fear of my son ultimately needing a liver transplant. I know all the medical and all the things that go along with that, and I was thinking of it as just the life changer that it would be in a negative way. However, I've met multiple people over the last 2 days who have had liver transplants, and I am incredibly impressed about how well they're doing, even young 20-year-olds, and how incredibly well they're doing and their quality of life that they have gotten back, and people just speaking so positively about it. So that's been a great, an uplifting thing for me. I do. I think, having a young son with a disease, I'm hoping in his lifetime that a cure will be found and we won't ultimately have to get to transplant. I think the stem cell research is incredibly enlightening and I think has great potential. Also, gut microbiome has been a topic of discussion for IBD as well as PSC, and I think targets there are going to be critical. And if we identify really which microbiotics, which bugs are causing this or leading to this, I think it would be key. And I also think, the gene therapy field is also something, that has been very successful in breast cancer and other types of cancers. And I think finding the targets that are awry in this disease will be very important to find, hopefully, some type of targeted treatments and cures. I think, so from my perspective, I think I've had a great experience, but I think one of the things that has also made me the most happy was bringing my 16-year-old son, who was incredibly reticent about coming. But he came reluctantly, and I haven't seen him since the beginning of the conference because PSC Partners has done such an amazing job with the teens in having activities and introducing them to one another. And he had never met somebody with PSC, and I think he has just embraced this and has had an incredible time, and I think some incredible mentors that are other teens as well as those in their young 20s that have just formed a bond here, and that makes me feel great.